Hi there, my name is Nicole Hebert with the Moose Jaw Journey to Hope team, and this is Voices of Hope. All right. Okay, welcome. So my name is Nicole Hebert. I'm with the Journey to Hope team in Moose Jaw, and this is our Voices of Hope series.
So my name is Sage Yathon. I live in Regina. I live with my husband, Deacon, and we've got 2 kids. My oldest kid is Charlotte. So she was my first. She's 4 years old, or just a little bit older than 4. And then my youngest and probably last his name is Jack, and he is 18 months old. So I've got 2 small humans running around me most of the time. And yeah, I guess the reason that I am here is I talk a lot about mental health. It's something that I could talk about probably all day in, day out. And my mental health journey started when I was diagnosed with postpartum depression and anxiety when I had my daughter. So that's where it kind of all began for me.
I guess let's maybe bring it back a little bit, just in terms of being a new mom and what are some typical maybe thoughts or just situations, experiences that you went through that you felt were either pivotal or held a huge impact in your experience when you became a mother?
Yeah. Well, when I first became a mother, I was very certain that I wasn't going to struggle with mental health. I had sort of decided, nope, I've got supports. This is not going to happen to me. I'm not going to be one of the statistic. 4 years ago, the discussion around postpartum depression was very different than what it is now. But pretty much right away, it was clear that my mental health was struggling. And how that showed up for me was thoughts of not wishing that I hadn't had a baby, wishing I could just send her back. And I was very, very certain that I was not supposed to be a mother. And it was sort of this trick, I had this baby, but she's supposed to be someone else's. So what do I do here? But it was almost irrational. It was a rational thought that this wasn't my baby. Somebody else is supposed to take care of her. I just pushed her into this world. And that was the thought that was living in my brain at the time when she was a newborn.
Yeah. And so when did you start having these thoughts? Was it immediately, or was it kind of delayed? Because I think sometimes too, everyone's different. But sometimes there are things that happen, whether it's a close call, maybe kind of tips a little bit, and that's the trigger that gets you to worry or wonder. So I'm curious to know, maybe when did these happen? Were they happening before your first cute bundle of joy arrived, or did it happen after?
Right. Yeah, for me, the first couple months were really, I was actually quite happy. I don't think I even shed a tear. I was I was doing really well. And then I think the first time that I noticed, I don't think I'm supposed to be feeling this way, she was about 7 months old, actually. So it's hard to know exactly how long I was feeling that before the 7-month point, but that's when I reached out for help, and everything sort of shifted as far as my understanding of what I should be feeling and what I was feeling. It was around that 7-month point for me.
When you started to notice that you were having these thoughts and struggling with your mental health, were you able to have conversations with your family about what you were going through, or is this more something what was your kind of take when you were noticing that you were going through this? Because I know you mentioned before that, you were adamant, I wasn't going to deal with mental health, I decided it, and then it happens. What was kind of running through your mind when you started to notice that?
I definitely thought, this is my problem and my problem only. I should be able to deal with this on my own. which now I know is not the case. But I took a long time before I was able to tell anybody, even my husband. I think the first person I told was one of my close friends. And then the second person I told was my husband. And then after that, it was a complete stranger. And then eventually I just started getting better at talking about it. But when I first realized, like, okay, my symptoms they line up with what I've seen online, with what postpartum depression feels like. It was like all of a sudden I had like labeled myself, and it was going forward from that was hard. It was sort of like an identity shift to all of a sudden be like, well, now this means that I am one in whatever number, like statistic, like realizing that was my reality was really difficult.
So what did this support look like for you, and why was it beneficial? Or did you have to utilize a number of different things that kind of stood out as, pivots in the mental situation that you were undergoing?
Yeah, so there was definitely some trial and error. The first thing I did was I Googled postpartum depression Regina, and then a woman's name came up who I reached out to. I just sent them an email. It was like a mom group. And I was like, okay, what do I do? That was like the stranger that I first talked to. And it was like, I was just casting a web, like, let's see what I'm supposed to be doing, what people should do when they find out that they're struggling. And she sort of sent me like a list of resources, and I just started at the top. So the very first thing I did was I called maybe 811, I think it was, and I spoke to a nurse, and I talked to this nurse for like an hour, and it was the most validating conversation. Thank God it was a nice person on the other end of the phone, because you never know who you're going to get when you call those public health lines. But I had like this wonderful hour-long conversation with this nurse where she just basically told me that what I was experiencing was common, but that it wasn't necessarily okay, and that it was okay for me to need help and to not be okay. And so that was the first, I had a good first experience, which thank goodness for that, because not everybody does. And then from there, I think, yes, then she told me to talk to my doctor, and that was another person that I had a good relationship with, thankfully. And we shouldn't be so surprised, but I had a good relationship with my family doctor. So then I went in and made that first appointment to get things started from there.
You also mentioned too, I appreciate the steps kind of that you took. And you also mentioned too that there's kind of, it shouldn't be a surprise. There are certain things that you did that shouldn't be a surprise. They shouldn't have been so far-fetched, like talking to a stranger. There are so many times where I have actually heard young mothers, and that is a common thing that happens for them, especially on days where it's the most difficult, is talking to a stranger. So in your opinion, as a mother, and maybe and I don't know the story, but maybe you ran into another mother that could relate to, but how powerful is it to just be able to talk to a stranger?
Well, it's somebody who doesn't know you before you felt this way. And they don't have any ties attached to you, right? So they're not going to feel ashamed of you, or you're not threatening their happiness by telling them. Like, it's scary to tell someone who loves you that you're not doing okay, because you feel like it makes them sad. You don't want to be the person to bring someone else down. But if you talk to a stranger, they don't have any skin in the game. Like, they're just like a perfect person to talk to, like, that's why we go to therapy. We need somebody who's like a third party who didn't know us before.
Yeah. And it's so powerful too. I've experienced it myself, where I've had like the worst days, and those are always the days where you're sitting in the park and just someone sits on the same bench as you, and you're kind of at first like, are they sitting on the same bench as me? But then they start talking to you, and sometimes you wonder if people sense that you need the conversation. But I found it so empowering that it is very consistent among women, and maybe not just women, men too. We don't have to like genderize it, I guess, but we can definitely look at it in a way that when it comes to parenthood, there's a common trend of connecting, and
Mm-hmm.
there's always the story of, I ran into this person, I have no idea who they were. No idea. And they
Yeah.
asked how my day was. I told them that, my kid basically, there's a mess in the car. I haven't finished this. And it's just kind of like
Yeah.
word vomit that comes out. But then after you do it, you have such a good conversation with them. And
Yeah.
you're like, wow, it almost makes it a part of your life. A lot of the things that are happening that don't seem either real or don't seem like anyone else is experiencing it, and then being able to bring that and start talking about it, you start to see the human in all of it.
Yeah,
I
absolutely.
really appreciate that with women, especially with dads, with young parents even. There's a lot of young parent programs that I've worked with, and even their perspectives of being a young parent in high school, or fresh out of high school, either nowhere to turn, not a whole lot of supports, and just how physically as a whole, and I connect the mental to physical, but how they got through that and how they became their own person as a parent. And
Absolutely.
so that brings me into my next question for you, and that is, there are different types of experiences when it comes to postpartum. So would you be able to kind of explain the differences between postpartum depression, postpartum psychosis? I know you've kind of labeled a couple before when we've met, so I'm interested to just know what the differences are between those experiences.
Yeah, so I mean, I can speak to how those things have shown up for me. I'm by no means a medical professional. I'm just somebody who's heard a lot of stories. So as far as postpartum depression and anxiety, like that would be after the baby's been born. I know a lot of people have experienced perinatal mental health struggles, and so that will happen sometimes like as soon as pregnancy even begins, and then following after as well. For me, I thought that postpartum depression meant that you were crying all the time, and I never cried. And so when I found like a list of descriptions that resonated with me, that was like an honest depiction of it, not just how it shows up on TV, because I think the image of postpartum depression in the media is mostly postpartum psychosis, where the mother's out of control and there's a risk of her harming herself for the baby, and there's like this immediate intervention that needs to happen, and it's scary, right? Like that's a really real experience, but for me that was not my experience. And so because I didn't consider myself that extreme, I think that I was able to I made my problem sort of feel like insignificant. I didn't really take myself seriously. But I found this definition of postpartum depression and anxiety, and it was sort of side by side, one list of the depressive symptoms and then one list of the anxious symptoms. And those were the ones that really resonated with me because they were applicable to real life. And with the depression, one of them was, the ones that I remember anyways, is feeling hopeless, feeling like you didn't want to wake up the next morning, which isn't necessarily suicidal thoughts, but just not feeling like there was any point to waking up the next day. And of course, sometimes with depression, we cry, but for me, I didn't have I wasn't really emotional. I was pretty reserved and in my head. But I definitely felt like there wasn't any sort of a point to carrying on. And then on the other side of things, with the postpartum anxiety, the symptoms that really stood out to me or resonated with how I was feeling was like the worrying, like over worrying, blaming myself for a lot of things, taking that full responsibility for everything to do with the baby, and feeling like I was blaming myself for everything. But also some physical symptoms, like I would get like a really, really quick heartbeat, and my breathing would be sped up, and I would feel like sort of this out of body feeling, and it was really hard to get on top of it. And that sort of feeling would come up anytime that I felt triggered by something, whether it was the thought of going out into public with a crying baby, or any situation where I felt like I would be perceived as a bad mother. I felt very anxious about, and that kept me inside a lot of the time. I didn't leave my house very much with my first anyways.
And it's also becoming a new parent. Another common thread is it can be very isolating at first because it's quite a learning curve in one aspect and just an overall new experience. You've, gotten to know your baby inside of you for, so long, and then now the baby's out, and it's almost a new part, a new phase of your relationship with this child. So in what you've kind of learned now, because you had a second child, so
yes,
in what you learned from your first child and your experience with postpartum depression and anxiety, how has that impacted your understanding of your relationship with your kids and being a mother?
So, I've come a long way. Like, I can see that I've come a long way since I had first been diagnosed. And a lot of the things that I believed then, I've sort of debunked by now. And like you said, I had a second child, which for some people, it's like, well, why would you put yourself at risk for that again? Like, if it was so hard the first time, it's going to be hard the second time. But I knew, like, I was so excited to have another baby. And I was like, there's no way that I'm not. And I just, like, now I know what I need to do. And that's not to say that the second time wasn't hard or harder, because I had another child to look after as well. But I had gotten, by the time I had my second baby, I had gotten really good at identifying when I was struggling. And I was like fiercely stubborn that I was not going to let myself take everything on again by myself. It was like, no way, I am not keeping this inside this time. I'm going to talk about it. I'm going to tell people when I need help. I refuse to do this alone. And I had to be like my own advocate that way. And I know that that's not easy for everybody to do. But as far as my relationship with my kids go, I had to convince myself that it is a good thing for them to have a mom who is honest, I guess, and emotional. And I think that, emotional regulation and emotional intelligence is so important for kids. And so if they only have this perception of a happy mom, whether the mom is happy or not, it doesn't really show them that there is a range of emotions that are okay. And so I see it as a benefit to my kids and a benefit to our relationship, because I can explain to them, yes, mommy's mad, but it's not your fault. Mommy's having a hard day. I'm struggling, but it's not your fault. And, like, it's okay to show these emotions. When you're mad, it's okay to stomp around. We angry dance in my living room. We get it out. Like, it's a normal part of our day. And of course, like, I'm not mad all the time. Like, they see a range of emotions in me, and I've just had to convince myself, even when I doubt it, that it's good and healthy and it's good for them and their development to have a mom who is just human and is not, I'm not just this happy shell mom.
Yeah. And it really sounds too like, we talk a lot about co-regulation, and it's so important. And it's not even to the point, a lot of times too, and I teach this with families that I work with, a lot of times the parents think it's for the purpose of the kid. And really go into it, it's really for the purpose of you, because you're the parent. So when things go awry, it does fall on your shoulders. So how are we going to take care of ourselves? You don't get breaks, even going to the bathroom. So it just shows the value too that your child is going to understand. And I like that you say, this isn't your fault. I have feelings. It's okay for me to have feelings. It's safe for me to have feelings. And we can regulate together. We can process the feelings together. I know a lot of us have probably grown up with being more private, the burden or not
Yeah.
worthy enough. And as women, as different professions, naturally as like a social worker myself, there's always the
Hmm.
complexity of not feeling worthy enough. And I think that also ties into our emotions, our feelings when we're struggling, when we're not 100%. Social media makes us think this way. And it is such a joy to see families spend more time being honest about being human, about that
Yeah.
these are not abnormal things. We're allowed to be sad together. We're
Yep.
allowed. I like that you do angry dances. Those are the
Yes.
best. You just gotta dance it
Yes.
out. So I appreciate all of that because it lets children know that it is safe to feel.
Yes, absolutely. It doesn't help anyone to look like you don't waver. It doesn't help anyone to look like you're handling everything. It just makes them feel like they're doing something wrong when they can't handle their emotions.
Yeah, totally.
Everything, you just have to make everything normal.
Yes, yeah, you have to make it human. You have to humanize everything as best you can because we only have so much time in our lives and times are changing. We're in times too where the benefit is we don't have a choice. We are with ourselves. We can't escape ourselves. We have to
Hmm.
embrace who we are. We have to embrace what we're not, and our feelings are definitely one of those things. And more people are talking, more people are reaching out, more people are wanting that connection, even if they're not able to talk. And so, which I appreciate too, what you were saying about I wanted them to know that it's not their fault, but I also wanted them to know that I'm going to have these days, and so are they.
Hmm.
And I also appreciate that you said, I'm gonna have my second child, but I'm not going to do this alone. I'm going to delegate. I'm going to utilize my support system. I refuse. Um, and I think that's a really empowering thing to say because you're setting up boundaries for yourself as a parent to set yourself up in a way where you can authentically be yourself as a parent.
Hmm.
Um,
Hmm.
and that's such a strong message to give so many young parents out there, especially young women that are having kids, whether it's alone, whether they have a partner, whether they're in separation. It doesn't matter because it is so important that they have a support system and they're able to heal and recover honestly.
To what we're saying about like emotional intelligence with kids, as much as it benefits them, and I can tell them it's not your fault that I'm feeling this way, me communicating to them, like when I hear myself say that, it reminds me that when they are feeling big feelings, when they're really mad or really sad, that it's not my fault, right? Because we can't prevent our kids from feeling feelings. They're going to have them. And when my kid's having a tantrum, I need to be able to regulate myself so that it doesn't hurt me.
Yeah.
Because they're going to have those emotions. And if every time they do, you take it as a hit to your worth as a mother or your skill level of parenting, like that, you're going to get hit every day by that. Like you need to be able to navigate through their emotions as well as your own. It's huge. That's what I do all day. It's exhausting, but it's like, if I can come out at the end of the day, not as least amount of like hurt by all the crap that we've gone through that day. Like you just have to survive and get to the other end of the day sometimes.
Yeah, and that's so true. And I mean, and it's so important to say that and to say it out loud because there are a lot of people out there that live in silence, and if they don't have a second opinion, other than maybe how they were raised or what they see on social media. And I think that's super important because it is exhausting. It's not like you do it and it eventually gets easier. It's always hard. It's always hard.
It's every day.
Yeah, it doesn't.
It keeps going.
It keeps going.